What if the happiest day of your life marked the beginning of your worst nightmare, all because of one simple decision, one single click? Linda Wilson, a 52-year-old woman, had endured more heartbreak than most could imagine. Failed relationships, years of loneliness, and a longing for companionship had left her questioning whether love was something she'd ever truly find. Then, on a spontaneous vacation to Colombia, Linda met a man who seemed to be the answer to her prayers, a man who swept her off her feet with charm, attentiveness, and promises of forever. Their love story, at first glance, seemed like a dream come true. The relationship blossomed quickly, with the couple building what Linda believed was a foundation for a beautiful future together. When he proposed, she didn't hesitate. After years of waiting for her fairy tale ending, she was finally the one wearing the white dress, walking down the aisle toward her happily ever after. But behind the smiles and vows lay a series of secrets that would soon come to light. Just 24 hours after her wedding, Linda Wilson's life came to a shocking and violent end, and her husband, the man she thought she could trust, was at the center of it all. It all started with one Facebook post. A simple photo, shared in a moment of joy, ignited a storm that no one could have foreseen. What was meant to celebrate love exposed lies so intricate they would unravel into a horrifying truth. How did a man Linda trusted with her life become her murderer just one day into their marriage? And how could such a tragedy have been prevented? As we uncover the chilling details of Linda's story, we want to hear from you. Could this have been stopped? What would you have done if you were in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and stay with us as we uncover the truth behind a marriage built on deception and a single post that revealed it all. Linda Wilson had always believed in second chances, even when life gave her every reason to doubt them. A 52-year-old woman with a heart full of hope, Linda had experienced her fair share of heartbreak. Her past was riddled with failed relationships, some that left her questioning her judgment, others that left her doubting whether true love was meant for her at all. Yet, Linda remained resilient. She refused to let the disappointments define her and instead focused on building a life filled with optimism, surrounded by friends, and pursuing small joys that kept her spirit alive. Linda's life was not glamorous, but it was meaningful. As a dedicated schoolteacher, she spent her days nurturing young minds, giving her students the encouragement she often longed for herself. Outside of work, she was the friend who always showed up with a kind word, a warm smile, and an ear ready to listen. For years, she watched as her closest friends found love, married, and started families. She attended their weddings with genuine happiness for them, though she secretly wondered if she'd ever have her own turn to walk down the aisle. Despite the lingering ache of loneliness, Linda clung to her belief that love could still find her. Her social media painted a picture of a hopeful, vibrant woman. Linda's posts often featured snapshots of her solo travels, scenic sunsets, and inspirational quotes about perseverance and faith. To her friends, she was the embodiment of quiet strength. But behind the curated posts was a woman who deeply longed for companionship, a partner to share her life with. Among her closest confidants was Sarah, her best friend and unwavering support system. Sarah and Linda had been inseparable for decades, sharing life's highs and lows. They were more than friends, they were like sisters. Sarah knew every corner of Linda's heart, every secret she had ever dared to share. Sarah celebrated Linda's joys and stood by her through the heartbreaks, always offering wisdom and guidance when it was needed most. So, when Linda returned from a vacation in Colombia with news that she had met someone special, Sarah's first instinct was happiness. But as Linda began describing her whirlwind romance, Sarah's happiness quickly gave way to concern. The man Linda had met, James, sounded almost too good to be true. Linda spoke of him with a kind of giddy excitement Sarah hadn't seen in years. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to know exactly what Linda needed. He made her feel special in a way no one else had before. He listened to her, made her laugh, and treated her like the most important person in the world. To Linda, he was everything she had been waiting for, a man who finally made her believe in love again. But to Sarah, James was a question mark. From the moment Linda mentioned him, Sarah's instincts told her to be cautious. There was something about the way Linda described him that didn't sit right. James had no online presence, no Facebook, no Instagram, no way to trace his life beyond what he had told Linda. He spoke very little about his past, brushing off questions with vague answers. And then there was the age gap. At 52, Linda was well into her middle years, but James appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s. It wasn't just the difference in age, it was the feeling that James had deliberately avoided revealing too much about himself. Linda, however, was unfazed by any of this. She brushed off Sarah's subtle questions about James's lack of openness, insisting that he was simply a private person. Linda told Sarah that she had never felt so alive, so seen. After years of disappointment, she believed she had finally found her soulmate. Her joy was so palpable that Sarah didn't have the heart to voice her growing doubts. Sarah decided to keep her concerns to herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something about James was off. Privately, she began looking into him, trying to find any information that might ease her mind, or confirm her fears. She searched social media platforms, scoured public records, and even Googled the name he gave Linda. But James was a ghost. There was no trace of him anywhere, no evidence of his life before he met Linda. The lack of information only deepened Sarah's unease. Still, Sarah knew she couldn't confront Linda directly. Linda had fallen hard for James, and any criticism of him might only drive a wedge between the two friends. Sarah decided to stay quiet, but she kept her guard up, quietly observing James's behavior whenever she had the chance. As Linda and James's relationship grew more serious, Sarah's concern turned into quiet vigilance. When James proposed, Linda's excitement was infectious. She called Sarah immediately, her voice trembling with happiness as she described the moment James got down on one knee. Linda gushed about how thoughtful he was, how he had planned every detail of the proposal to make it perfect. Sarah listened, congratulated her friend, and tried to push down the sinking feeling in her stomach. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of planning and anticipation. Linda was glowing with happiness, and Sarah did her best to support her, even as her doubts about James lingered. One moment, in particular, stood out. During a casual conversation, Linda mentioned that James had asked her not to post anything about their relationship on social media. He wanted to keep their love private, away from prying eyes. Linda saw it as a sign of his thoughtfulness, his desire to cherish their connection without outside interference. But Sarah saw it differently. To her, James's insistence on secrecy felt like a red flag. Sarah's unease deepened, but she didn't want to spoil Linda's happiness. Instead, she urged her friend to be careful, subtly encouraging Linda to think twice about James's unusual request. Linda, however, was too caught up in the excitement of her upcoming wedding to give much thought to Sarah's concerns. She trusted James completely, and she believed that their love was special enough to transcend any doubts. As the wedding day approached, Sarah wrestled with her instincts. She wanted to protect Linda, but she didn't want to ruin her friend's happiness. She decided to keep her doubts to herself for now, hoping that time would reveal the truth about James. But time, as it turned out, was not on their side. This delicate balance, between Linda's blissful optimism and Sarah's quiet skepticism, would soon be shattered. While Linda was preparing for a future filled with love and hope, Sarah was bracing herself for the possibility that James was not the man he claimed to be. Linda Wilson's wedding day was a moment she had dreamed of for years. After so much heartbreak and loneliness, she finally felt like her story was taking a turn toward happiness. The ceremony was planned with care, reflecting Linda's personality, simple, meaningful, and full of warmth. Held in a small chapel adorned with soft floral arrangements, it was an intimate affair attended by close family and friends. Everyone present had witnessed Linda's journey and shared in her joy, making the occasion even more special. Linda wore a classic white gown that suited her perfectly, the long train flowing gracefully as she walked down the aisle. Her face radiated with excitement and hope, her eyes fixed on James, who waited at the altar. James, in a tailored suit, greeted her with the same charm that had captivated her from the beginning. To Linda, this felt like the culmination of all her hopes and prayers, the moment she had waited for her entire life. Throughout the ceremony, Linda's emotions ran high. She laughed softly during the exchange of vows, tears welling in her eyes as she promised to share her life with the man she loved. James, too, delivered his vows with conviction, his tone steady and reassuring. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause. Linda's heart swelled with gratitude as she looked around at the faces of her loved ones, all beaming with happiness for her. But even on this joyous day, there was an undercurrent of tension. James had made a point of asking Linda not to share any part of their relationship on social media. It had been a recurring request throughout their time together. At first, Linda didn't think much of it. She saw it as a preference for privacy, something that made James unique in a world where oversharing had become the norm. But as their relationship progressed, his insistence on secrecy grew stronger. In the days leading up to the wedding, James reminded Linda once again. "I'd prefer it if we kept this just between us and the people here," he said. "I don't want our personal lives out there for everyone to see." Linda, caught up in the excitement of the moment, nodded in agreement. She had no reason to question his motives. To her, his request seemed harmless, a simple boundary he wanted to maintain. But Linda's best friend, Sarah, was less convinced. Sarah had watched the relationship unfold with quiet skepticism, her instincts warning her that something wasn't right. James's insistence on avoiding social media struck her as odd, even suspicious. While Sarah understood the desire for privacy, James's complete aversion to any online presence raised questions in her mind. Why would someone go to such lengths to remain invisible? And why was he so adamant about keeping their relationship off the internet? Sarah didn't push Linda too hard on the subject, knowing her friend was deeply in love. But on the morning of the wedding, as they got ready together, Sarah brought it up one last time. "Are you sure about not sharing anything?" she asked gently. "It's your day, Linda. You should do what makes you happy." Linda hesitated for a moment, considering her friend's words. "James just doesn't like the idea of strangers knowing our business," she replied. "And honestly, I get it. I want to respect his feelings." Still, Sarah could tell that part of Linda wanted to share her happiness. For someone who had always celebrated the milestones of others, keeping this moment to herself felt unnatural. Sarah decided not to press the issue further, but her encouragement lingered in Linda's mind. Later that evening, during the reception, Linda was swept up in the magic of the celebration. The candlelit tables, the heartfelt toasts, the laughter echoing through the room, it was everything she had dreamed of. As the newlyweds danced under twinkling lights, Linda felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She couldn't help but think of the many friends and family members who weren't there to witness this beautiful moment. After the festivities had quieted down and the guests began to leave, Linda found a quiet moment to herself. She reached for her phone, scrolling through the photos taken earlier in the day. One image, in particular, caught her eye, a candid shot of her and James at the altar, their faces lit up with joy. In that moment, Linda felt a strong urge to share her happiness with the world. It wasn't about defying James's wishes, it was about celebrating the love and joy she had finally found. She thought about her friends who had supported her through so many difficult times, the ones who had cheered her on when she doubted herself. This post, she reasoned, wasn't for strangers, it was for the people who loved her and had been rooting for her all along. With trembling fingers, Linda composed a simple caption, "Just married. Feeling so grateful for this new chapter." She hesitated for a moment, James's words echoing in her mind. But then she thought of Sarah's encouragement, the idea that this was her day, her happiness to share. Taking a deep breath, she hit post. At first, it felt like a small victory. Notifications began to roll in almost immediately, likes, comments, and messages from friends congratulating her and expressing their joy. Linda smiled as she read through them, feeling a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. But what Linda didn't know was that this seemingly innocent act would set off a chain of events she could never have imagined. Before we reveal the incident that happened after the Facebook post, if you're yet to subscribe to our channel, we urge you to subscribe. If you've any thoughts, please share it in the comments section. Thank you for your support. It had been a long, emotional day for Linda and James. The wedding celebrations had been everything Linda had dreamed of, intimate, joyous, and full of love. By the time they returned to their hotel suite, Linda was still basking in the afterglow of the happiest day of her life. She was oblivious to the storm that was about to unfold. James stepped out onto the balcony, the night air brushing against his face. Linda, seated on the bed, picked up her phone once more, scrolling through the comments on her wedding post. Each message filled her heart with a little more joy, friends and family celebrating her moment of happiness, her triumph after years of loneliness. She had no idea that James, who had always been calm and composed, would react so differently when he discovered what she had done. When James came back inside, he glanced at her phone screen and froze. For a moment it was as if time had stopped. There it was, the photo she had shared, with the caption that so publicly announced their union. His face was unmistakably visible, and the comments had already begun piling up. For someone like James, who had worked so meticulously to avoid leaving any trace of his past, this was a disaster. "What did you do?" His voice was low, but it carried an edge that immediately put Linda on alert. She looked up, confused by his tone. "What do you mean?" she asked. James pointed to the screen. "You posted the picture," he said, his voice growing sharper. "I told you not to post anything. Why would you do that?" Linda's heart began to race. She had never seen James this way before. I just wanted to share our happiness," she stammered, unsure why he was reacting so strongly. "It's just a photo, James. It's nothing to get upset about." But to James, it wasn't just a photo. It was the one thing he had feared, a public connection that could expose him, could link him to the life he had tried so hard to leave behind. His mind raced with thoughts of what this post could mean. What if someone recognized him? What if it led to questions he couldn't answer? "Delete it," he said, his voice rising. "Delete it right now." Linda, taken aback by his sudden shift in demeanor, set her phone down. "James, calm down. It's just a picture. I don't understand why this is such a big deal." Her tone was firm but puzzled. She genuinely didn't grasp why he was so upset. "Because I told you not to." James shot back. His face was red now, his composure completely shattered. "I asked you to respect my wishes, and you went behind my back. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Linda's confusion turned to frustration. "It's my life too, James. I've waited my whole life for this moment. Why can't I share it with the people I care about?" "Because it's not just about you." James snapped, his voice echoing in the room. He was pacing now, his hands clenching and unclenching as he tried to contain his growing panic. "You don't understand. This isn't some harmless post. This could ruin everything." "Ruin what?" Linda shot back, her voice trembling. She stood up, crossing her arms as she faced him. "What are you so afraid of? Why does it matter if people know we're married?" James froze for a moment, his mind racing for an explanation. He couldn't tell her the truth, that he was a con artist with a history of targeting vulnerable women, that his entire life was built on lies and deception. Instead, he deflected, his frustration boiling over. "Just take it down, Linda. I'm not going to ask you again." "No," Linda's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed the hurt she felt. "I'm not taking it down. This is my life too, James. I have every right to share it if I want to." Her refusal pushed James to the edge. The pressure of his secrets, the fear of exposure, and the sudden loss of control all collided in his mind. He took a step closer, his voice now trembling with anger. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've put us both at risk. Do you even care? Linda didn't back down. At risk of what, James? What are you so afraid of? Tell me the truth. But James couldn't answer. The walls were closing in, and he felt like a caged animal. In that moment, rational thought gave way to pure panic. Without thinking, he reached for Linda's phone, trying to grab it from her hands. Stop it! Linda yelled, pulling the phone away. You're scaring me. Her words only fueled his desperation. He lunged for the phone again, but Linda stepped back, her voice shaking. James, this isn't you. What's going on? Her refusal, her defiance, was too much for him to handle. In a fit of rage, James lashed out, pushing Linda with more force than he intended. The room seemed to tilt as Linda stumbled backward, her arms flailing as she tried to catch her balance. The balcony railing was low, too low to stop her momentum. Linda's eyes widened in shock as she teetered on the edge, her voice caught in a breathless gasp. And then, in an instant, she was gone. The sound of her body hitting the ground below was sharp and final. James stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The adrenaline coursing through his veins began to fade, replaced by a cold, sinking realization. He rushed to the balcony, looking down at Linda's motionless body. No, 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 he muttered, his hands shaking. It was an accident. I didn't mean to. But no one would hear his excuses. The scene below was already drawing attention, voices of alarm, footsteps rushing toward the body. James stepped back from the balcony, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt completely exposed. His mind raced, trying to rationalize what had happened, trying to find a way out. But there was no escape from this. The truth, the lies, the years of deception, it all came crashing down in that single moment. The call to emergency services came quickly after Linda's fall. Hotel staff and nearby guests, drawn by the commotion and the horrifying sound of her impact, rushed to the scene. Linda's lifeless body lay sprawled on the stone pathway below the balcony. Blood pooled around her head, staining the ground, as the once serene resort transformed into a crime scene. Witnesses described hearing shouting from the couple's suite just moments before the tragedy. One guest, who had been walking to her room at the time, recounted hearing a man's raised voice, followed by a woman shouting in distress. They sounded like they were arguing, she told investigators. The woman's voice was pleading, but I couldn't make out the words. Another witness, a couple staying in a nearby suite, corroborated the account. There was a loud crash, and then everything went silent, the man explained. I looked out of the window and saw her lying there. It was horrifying. Police arrived at the scene shortly after, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the resort grounds. Officers made their way to the couple's suite, where they found James in a state of shock. He was seated in a chair, his head in his hands, muttering to himself. It was an accident, he kept repeating, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean for this to happen. But the officers were unmoved by his declarations of innocence. James was immediately detained and taken into custody for questioning. The investigation into Linda's death began in earnest, with detectives piecing together the events leading up to the fatal confrontation. As investigators combed through the hotel room, they found signs of a struggle. Furniture had been knocked over, and Linda's phone lay on the floor, its screen shattered. Detectives also retrieved James's phone, hoping it might shed light on the circumstances of the incident. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined Linda's body, confirming that the impact from the fall had been fatal. Linda's family, devastated by the news, demanded answers. How could a joyous occasion like her wedding end in such tragedy? And who was this man she had trusted with her heart? Their grief turned to shock as detectives began uncovering the truth about James, starting with his real name. James was not who he claimed to be. His true identity was Alan Grant, a man with a long history of deception and manipulation. Investigators discovered that Allen was a professional con artist who had spent years preying on vulnerable, wealthy women. His modus operandi was as calculated as it was cruel. Allen frequented vacation resorts, targeting women who appeared to be traveling alone. He would charm his way into their lives, presenting himself as a successful businessman or consultant. His attentiveness and charisma made him almost impossible to resist. Once he gained their trust, Allen would use his relationship with these women to access their finances. In some cases, he drained their savings entirely before disappearing without a trace. What made Allen so effective at his schemes was his meticulous avoidance of any digital footprint. He used aliases, avoided social media entirely, and left no paper trail. Without photos or online accounts to tie him to his crimes, he became a ghost, someone who could vanish as quickly as he appeared. But this time, Allen's carefully constructed facade had cracked. The Facebook post Linda had shared became the key to unraveling his lies. Investigators noted that the post, which featured Allen's face and full name, was the first public connection he had ever allowed to exist. It was a crucial mistake that allowed detectives to trace his past activities. As the investigation progressed, detectives began receiving calls from women who recognized Allen's face from the Facebook post. Some had been victims of his scams, while others had narrowly avoided falling prey to him. Their stories painted a chilling picture of Allen's tactics. One woman recounted how she had met Allen at a resort in Cancun. He had introduced himself as an entrepreneur and quickly won her over with his charm. "He was everything I thought I wanted," she explained. But after a few months, he started asking for money, first for a business deal, then for personal expenses. "Before I knew it, he had drained my account and disappeared." Another victim shared a similar experience, describing how Allen had manipulated her into signing over control of her finances. "He made me believe we were building a future together," she said. "But the moment I started asking questions about his past, he cut off all contact." Financial records uncovered by detectives revealed a pattern of large withdrawals and transfers linked to Allen's previous victims. In total, he had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, leaving a trail of heartbreak and financial ruin in his wake. The Facebook post became a turning point in the investigation. It connected Allen to a network of crimes that had previously gone undetected. Detectives pieced together his movements over the past decade, identifying resorts he had frequented and women he had targeted. For Linda's family, the revelations were devastating. The man they had welcomed into their lives, the man who had promised to love and protect Linda, had been living a lie from the very beginning. Linda's best friend, Sarah, was especially shaken. She had suspected something was wrong but had never imagined the extent of Allen's deceit. As the investigation continued, Allen's carefully hidden life unraveled. Detectives uncovered multiple aliases, forged documents, and fake business ventures he had used to maintain his schemes. The evidence against him was overwhelming, leaving no doubt about his guilt. Allen was charged with murder and a host of other crimes related to his fraudulent activities. As he sat in his cell awaiting trial, the weight of his actions began to sink in. The man who had built his life on lies now faced the harsh reality of justice. The trial became a closely watched case, drawing attention for its tragic details and the shocking revelations of his double life. It was not just the story of a life taken too soon but also the exposure of a man who had built his existence on lies and manipulation. The courtroom was filled with a mix of reporters, Linda's grieving family and friends, and even some of Allen's past victims. For Linda's family, the trial was not just about justice for her murder but also about holding Allen accountable for the years of pain and destruction he had caused to so many. The prosecution wasted no time presenting their case. They meticulously laid out the events of the wedding day and the hours leading up to Linda's death. Witnesses were called to recount what they had heard from the couple's hotel room, a heated argument, followed by a sickening crash. The hotel staff described finding Linda's body on the pathway below, her injuries consistent with a violent fall from the balcony. But the most damning evidence came from the Facebook post Linda had shared just hours before her death. The prosecution argued that Allen's reaction to the post revealed his true nature, a man desperate to protect his hidden life at all costs. The post, which included a picture of Allen and Linda, was the first time his face and name had been publicly linked. Prosecutors painted a chilling picture of Allen's motives, explaining how the post threatened to unravel his carefully constructed web of deception. To bolster their case, the prosecution introduced a wealth of evidence that highlighted Allen's fraudulent activities. Financial records were presented, showing a clear pattern of theft and manipulation. These records detailed how Allen had drained the accounts of his previous victims, using their trust to gain access to their finances before disappearing without a trace. The most powerful moments came when Allen's past victims took the stand. One by one, they recounted their experiences with him, their voices trembling with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. A woman in her 60s described how Allen had approached her during a vacation, winning her trust with his charm and attentiveness. "I believed him," she said, her voice breaking. "He made me think we had a future together. And then he was gone, with everything I had." Another victim shared a similar story, detailing how Allen had convinced her to invest in a fake business venture. "He was so convincing," she said. "He knew exactly what to say to make me believe in him. I didn't just lose my money, I lost my confidence, my trust in people." The prosecution also presented the timeline of Allen's crimes, tracing his movements from resort to resort and showing how he had systematically targeted women for years. The Facebook post, they argued, had been the catalyst that finally exposed him. With his face and name now public, it was only a matter of time before his past caught up with him. Allen's defense team, meanwhile, attempted to frame Linda's death as a tragic accident. They argued that the couple had been engaged in a heated argument, fueled by misunderstandings and miscommunication. According to the defense, Allen had not intended to harm Linda. They claimed that the push that sent her over the balcony was not an act of malice but a moment of poor judgment in the heat of the moment. But the prosecution dismantled this narrative with methodical precision. They pointed to the evidence of a struggle in the hotel room, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and the bruises found on Linda's wrists. Forensic experts testified that the force of Allen's push was no accident, describing how it had been deliberate enough to send her over the railing. The courtroom grew increasingly tense as Linda's family took the stand to deliver their victim impact statements. Her younger sister, holding back tears, spoke of the pain of losing someone who had been her confidant and her rock. "Linda was the kindest person I knew," she said. "She believed in love, even after everything she had been through. And she trusted him. She trusted him with her life, and he took it from her." Linda's brother, his voice heavy with emotion, spoke next. "We thought he loved her," he said, his fists clenching as he spoke. "We thought he was the person she deserved after all the heartbreak she endured. But he wasn't. He was a liar. A manipulator. And he stole her from us." The courtroom was silent except for the quiet sobs of Linda's family and friends. Even some of Allen's past victims were visibly emotional, their faces etched with the shared pain of betrayal. In their closing arguments, the prosecution reminded the jury of the man Allen truly was, not a grieving husband who had made a mistake, but a predator who had spent years exploiting vulnerable women for his own gain. They emphasized that Linda's death was not an accident but the result of Allen's desperate attempt to silence her and protect his secrets. The jury deliberated for several hours before returning with their verdict. The verdict was clear: Allen Grant, the man who had so thoroughly deceived Linda Wilson and many others, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the court, it was an opportunity to hold him accountable for his actions. For Linda's family, it was the closest thing to justice they could hope for in the wake of her senseless death. When the sentence was read aloud, there was no celebration, no feeling of triumph, only quiet relief that Allen's reign of deceit and destruction was over. Linda's family sat together in the front row of the courtroom, tears streaming down their faces as they held one another tightly. It was a bittersweet moment. They knew that nothing could bring Linda back, but they also knew that her tragic story had brought an end to a predator who had caused unimaginable harm to so many. Outside the courthouse, Linda's best friend Sarah spoke to reporters. She had been a constant presence throughout the trial, standing by the family's side and reliving the heartbreak of losing someone she considered a sister. Sarah's voice was steady, but her eyes revealed the depth of her pain. "Today's verdict brings some closure," she said, "but it doesn't take away the loss we feel every day." Linda was a kind, hopeful person who deserved so much better. If there's one thing we want people to take away from this, it's the importance of paying attention to the signs, those small, uneasy feelings that tell you something isn't right. For Linda's family, the aftermath of the trial was a time to reflect on her life and the legacy she left behind. Her younger sister, who had been a voice of strength during the trial, spoke about the ripple effect of Linda's story. "Linda was someone who believed in love, who believed in the goodness of people," she said. "But her trust was taken advantage of by someone who saw her kindness as a weakness. We want people to know that it's okay to ask questions, to trust your instincts, and to protect yourself. That's what Linda would want." Sarah, in particular, felt a deep sense of responsibility to honor Linda's memory. In the months following the trial, she began dedicating her time to raising awareness about emotional abuse and manipulation in relationships. Drawing from her own experience as Linda's confidant, Sarah spoke openly about the red flags she had noticed early on: James's secrecy, his avoidance of personal details, and his insistence on keeping their relationship off social media. She shared Linda's story at events, on podcasts, and through articles, hoping to help others recognize the warning signs before it was too late. The case also prompted broader discussions about trust and boundaries in relationships. Experts weighed in, emphasizing the importance of understanding that true love doesn't come with conditions that isolate or control. Linda's story became a cautionary tale, reminding people that while privacy in a relationship can be healthy, it should never come at the cost of one's sense of safety or autonomy. For Linda's family, the road to healing was long and difficult. Her siblings found solace in each other and in the memories of Linda's vibrant personality, her laughter, her kindness, and her unwavering belief in the possibility of happiness. They established a small foundation in her name, aimed at supporting survivors of emotional abuse and educating others about the dangers of manipulation. The ripple effects of Linda's tragedy extended far beyond her immediate circle. Alan Grant's case shed light on the tactics used by con artists to exploit vulnerable individuals. It became a point of reference for law enforcement agencies, helping them identify similar patterns of behavior in other cases. Survivors who had once remained silent about their experiences found the courage to come forward, inspired by the strength of Linda's family and friends. In the end, Linda's story was one of both heartbreak and hope. It was a stark reminder of how trust can be exploited by those with malicious intentions, but it was also a testament to the resilience of those left behind. Her family and friends refused to let her memory fade, turning their grief into a mission to protect others from suffering the same fate. As Sarah reflected on her journey, she often thought about the conversations she had with Linda in the weeks leading up to her wedding. She wished she had done more, pushed harder to make Linda see the concerns she had tried to voice. But rather than dwelling on the what-ifs, Sarah channeled her energy into making sure Linda's legacy would endure. "If we can help even one person avoid what Linda went through," she said, "then her story will have made a difference." Linda Wilson's life was taken too soon, but her story became a powerful reminder that love should never come at the cost of one's safety or well-being. Her memory lives on in the lessons she left behind, a beacon of hope for those navigating the complexities of trust, love, and human connection. The story of Linda Wilson is one that lingers long after the final verdict. Her life, marked by resilience and hope, was tragically cut short by a man who saw her kindness and trust as an opportunity to further his own agenda. For Linda, love was something she believed in wholeheartedly, a force that could overcome years of heartbreak and loneliness. But that same love blinded her to the warning signs that others might have noticed. This tragedy is a stark reminder of the dangers of misplaced trust and the devastating consequences of manipulation. Linda's story forces us to reflect on how easily charm and attentiveness can mask true intentions. It's a lesson that many of us may find difficult to accept because it challenges the fundamental belief that people are who they say they are. One of the hardest lessons from Linda's story is the importance of listening to our instincts. Her best friend Sarah had a quiet unease about James from the beginning. She noticed the gaps in his story, the absence of a digital presence, and his insistence on keeping the relationship private. But like so many of us, Sarah hesitated to voice her concerns too strongly, not wanting to risk hurting Linda's feelings or jeopardizing their friendship. This raises a difficult question: could Sarah have done more? Should she have pushed harder, even at the risk of Linda pulling away? It's a question with no easy answer, but it's one that highlights the delicate balance between respecting someone's choices and protecting them from harm. As viewers, it's easy to see the red flags in hindsight: James's refusal to share personal details, his avoidance of social media, his repeated insistence on secrecy. But in the moment, those signs might not seem as obvious, especially when emotions are involved. Love has a way of clouding judgment, of making us ignore the small voice in the back of our minds that tells us something isn't quite right. Have you ever been in a situation where you ignored red flags in a relationship? Maybe it was a subtle feeling of unease or a behavior you rationalized away. How did it turn out for you? Share your experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Linda's story also serves as a reminder that manipulation often works because it preys on our most basic desires, the need to feel loved, valued, and understood. James, or Alan, as we now know him, was a master at exploiting these vulnerabilities. He crafted an image of himself that was impossible to resist, using charm and attentiveness as tools to gain trust. For him, it was all part of a calculated plan, one he had executed many times before. But even the most carefully constructed facade can't hold forever. In the end, it was Linda's simple act of sharing her joy that brought Alan's lies crashing down. Her Facebook post, intended to celebrate love, became the key to exposing his deception. It's a cruel irony that the very thing she hoped would bring happiness ended up costing her life. To those who have watched this story unfold, it's a reminder of the lengths people will go to hide their secrets. It's a call to pay attention to the details, to trust your instincts, and to never ignore the uneasy feeling that something doesn't add up. Linda's story may be one of heartbreak, but it's also one of caution, a lesson that we must be vigilant in protecting ourselves and the people we care about. As we reflect on Linda's life and the lessons her story teaches us, we want to hear from you. Do you think Sarah could have done more to protect her friend? Have you ever felt torn between speaking up and staying silent and you noticed red flags in someone else's relationship? Let us know in the comments below. Your experiences and perspectives could help others recognize warning signs before it's too late. If this story has left you with questions, if it has made you think twice about the people you trust, then it has served its purpose. And if you found it gripping, we invite you to subscribe to our channel. Every week, we bring you stories that challenge what you think you know about trust, betrayal, and the human capacity for deception. Next time, we'll uncover another case that will leave you questioning everything. Stay tuned for more chilling and thought-provoking crime stories, and remember, sometimes the answers lie in the questions we're afraid to ask.